Dan Pfefferman.
And I'm Benny Shoulder, and welcome to Jewanced.
We're two Jewish guys. We grew up in America, we live in Israel, and we're looking to challenge popular conceptions, think critically, examine independently, and most of all, seek nuance.
Each episode will host a different guest. Together, we'll take a deep dive into politics, foreign affairs, religion, science, technology, food, the arts, business, you name it. A lot of it will deal with the Jewish world in Israel, but not all.
Our goal? To create a platform where people share their stories, insights, and visions. No talking points, no script, no agenda. Just a deeper, nuanced understanding of the world around us.
Join us as we explore, think, debate, and discuss, and perhaps most of all, listen. Jewanced.
You know, like nuanced, but with a J?
Yeah, they get it. Dude, let's just start. Hey, everybody out there in podcast land. This is Benny and Dan coming at you with another very special guest episode of Jewanced today. Before we get going, Dan, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm swell, thanks. Always a pleasure. So time is of the essence today. So before we get going, just want to say a quick shout out to all of our listeners. Thanks so much for checking in. Just real quick, check it out. Jewanced so far has enjoyed tremendous success. We have listeners literally all over the world in every continent except Antarctica. We continue to grow in leaps and bounds. That being said, we want to make sure that we can continue to produce top-notch content for you. So, as we're a listener-supported podcast, consider helping us by continue to expand by becoming a supporter today. You can make a one-time donation or a small monthly contribution or become a sponsor and advertise your business or organization on our platform. For more information, check out our newly revamped website at www.jewanced.com. That's www.jewanced.com. We've got a great show for you today. Dan, take it away.
Sure. So last week was part one of the special. As everyone who doesn't live in a yurt in rural Mongolia is aware, the U.S. presidential elections are rapidly approaching, and people are already submitting their early votes due to COVID. So no matter who you support, and by all means, these are important elections during what might be the most polarizing and divisive elections of our time, more and more politics seem to be an all-or-nothing game. So here at Jewanced, and we're all about the mission of introducing nuance and perspective and critical thinking to the Jewish and Israel game. We want to do our part to help shed light on these elections from a Jewish perspective. We're going to get into the major issues and offer both sides of the election a platform to express their views and discuss some of the more difficult issues. That's why we're super excited to have now of our two-part series with two of the biggest Jewish names in American politics. Last week, we were honored to host Haley Soifer, Executive Director of the Jewish Democratic Council of America. And today, we are equally honored and excited to host Senator Norm Coleman, National Chairman, Board of Directors of the Republican Jewish Coalition. Benny, since your family and our guest family have a history, why don't you please introduce our special guest today?
Absolutely. So for those of you who may not know, I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, the twin city to Senator Coleman's twin city of St. Paul, Minnesota, where he served as mayor. So to give a quick intro, for the past 28 years, Senator Coleman has dedicated his life to public service on the municipal, state, and national levels. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, where my father is from, graduating from the iconic James Madison High, with notable names such as Senator Chuck Schumer, Bernie Sanders, and the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, amongst others. He moved to my home state of Minnesota and rose to the rank of Chief Prosecutor and Solicitor General in the Attorney General's office. In his first political campaign, Senator Coleman ran as a Democrat for mayor of St. Paul and won. His tenure in City Hall brought him into conflict with state Democratic leaders, and in 1996, he famously switched parties. As a Republican, he won election to the Senate in 2002. That's the U.S. Senate. And there, Coleman was a strong supporter of bipartisan efforts to create American independence from foreign sources of energy. He served on the Agriculture Committee, where he played an important role in agriculture policy. In regards to foreign policy, he was a strong supporter of the Iraq War, outspoken on the threat posed by Iran to Western democracies and efforts to impose strict sanctions on the regime, and has always been a formidable and consistent supporter and defender of Israel. Since leaving official politics after being defeated by Democrat and fellow Jew, Senator Al Franken in the 2008 Senate race, Coleman has devoted his energies to the Republican Jewish Coalition and various nonprofit causes. He is currently of counsel at the law firm of Hogan Lovells. Senator Coleman, how's it going? How you
great.
doing?
Just two observations. I'm going to give you an edit on my resume, but first, I have to say that if we always consider ourselves Minnesota the frozen chosen, but if you had Antarctica, they would really be the frozen chosen. So, but we take pride.
I know.
We take pride. The addendum on my resume is that I ran as a Republican in a city that's about 85% Democrat for re-election. I declared as a Republican. Everyone said, I could never win. I got 60% of the vote, got reelected. And then in the Senate, I served on the Foreign Relations Committee. I was, in fact, the ranking member. I'll step back. Had been chair at one point of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee. But when the Democrats took control in 2006, I was asked by members of the pro-Israel community to join the Middle East Subcommittee, which John Kerry, by the way, was the chair. And I was asked to do that to be a balance. For those who really cared about Israel and support for Israel, to be there to actually check Senator Kerry. And so served on the prestigious subcommittee. I'm also, you listeners should know, I'm the national chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition. Obviously, so my issues are Israel, but they're also Republican. Jewish Republican is first, and it's not just about the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's also about what makes America stronger. Israel is in better position when America is strong, and they being our strongest ally in the Middle East, we both have kind of a mutual interest in each other's success.
Absolutely.
So I want to take you back many, many years. You grew up in Brooklyn, and I know as my dad grew up in Brooklyn, a lot of people left, back in the 60s and 70s. I know there's, things going on in New York in those times, and people kind of spread out, and you, like him and some others, wound up in Minnesota, of all places. And that's not 100% obvious as a trajectory.
I got a free ride to the University in Iowa Law School in 1974.
Okay.
I had a kid from Brooklyn, free ride to law school. And I had a free ride to law school. They actually worked with the administration there. So I had a job plus a free ride. So everyone's drinking draft beer. I was drinking Heineken out of a bottle. I mean, I had a good ride at Iowa. And then when I graduated in 76, New York was going bankrupt. And I wanted to do public service. So I've been recruited by the Minnesota AG, by the US AG, by the Minnesota Attorney General, and then some private firms. But I heard everyone from Iowa loves Minnesota's right north of Iowa. I heard there were tall blondes in Minnesota. I married one 39 years ago. We're still married. So once I got up there, I never left. And as you indicated in a little of my history, 17 years, AG's office, Solicitor General, Chief Prosecutor, Mayor of St. Paul for 2 terms, and the United States Senator. So Minnesota's been good to me, good to my family. It was a blessing. We planned, God laughs, and I ended up in Minnesota. And then my kid, I still have a Brooklyn accent, so I'm still considered an outsider in some ways, but my kids will be considered true Minnesotans. And grandkids,
Definitely.
by the way. I have a grandson, Adam, they're true blue Minnesotans.
Are you a Vikings fan?
I am a Vikings fan, and that's disappointing. I was a New York Giants fan. I was an LA Dodger. I was a Brooklyn Dodger fan. When the Dodgers left Brooklyn in 1957, I don't know if your dad was there then, it was like a funeral. I remember the conversation around the breakfast table and the death of sports when they left. So I migrated over to New York Mets, but then in Minnesota, I'm a Minnesotan and Twins and Vikings. Though my hero still is Sandy Koufax. He's still the greatest sports figure. That in my pantheon of sports figures, there's nobody greater than a linesman from Lafayette High School, our neighboring high school in Brooklyn, Sandy Koufax. Mm-hmm. And your listeners are saying, "Who is this? And what's all this history?" That I hope
as good Jewish listeners of a Jewish podcast, we really hope that they know who Sandy Koufax is. Of course, who don't know, Sandy Koufax famously would not play
against Minnesota Twins in the World Series. It was in Minnesota, and he didn't pitch on Yom Kippur. He pitched the next day, and Dodgers won the championship.
I heard he actually went to Beth El Synagogue in St. Louis Park to observe.
I got to ask you: is there something in the water in Brooklyn, in that neighborhood you grew up in, that produced so many leaders on the national level?
That's interesting because the trivia question. It was on the TV show Jeopardy one time. Was name the 3 U.S. senators who served in the United States Senate at the same time, representing 3 different states and 3 different political parties. And the answer is, as you indicated early on, was Bernie Sanders, socialist from Vermont, Chuck Schumer, Democrat, who was a year behind me, by the way. I was always a grade in front of Chuck. Democrat, and then Norm Coleman representing the Republican Party. And then Ruth Bader, as you indicated, also was there. I think it was, personally, I think it's the neighborhood. I think it's the families. We are all high achievers. And, at one point in Minnesota, you had the senator, you had a governor, and the previous senator, all originally from New York. Arnie Carlson, governor of Minnesota, Rudy Boschwitz, who came from Germany to Minnesota. To New York, I think there was a stopover there at some point. But in any case, there's been a New York connection, and in spite of folks thinking we have strange accents, they've managed to support us and vote for us.
There you go.
So you do your stint and you get to high positions in the Attorney General's office, and then you decide to run for mayor of St. Paul, and you win. As a Democrat, and then you switch sides.
And I switched sides, by the way, that's switching positions. So when I got elected, the very first thing that I did is my budget director to be came in and said to me, as at that point mayor-elect, he said the contract was approved by my per-union contract for the public employee unions was approved right before I took office. And my budget director to be said to, Mayor, if you approve this, the city's going to be bankrupt in 15 years. So I too much detail, but it was because they negotiated a retiree health benefit package that would have 93, that would have given full retiree health benefits to retiree spouses for the rest of their life without a dime of employee contribution. My budget director kind of looked to the future and said, you can have $200 million of unfunded liability in 15 years. My son Jake, when I got elected, was 8 years old. My daughter Sarah was 4. I thought 8 years was a blink of the eye. I figured 15 years was 2 blinks. And everybody told me, don't reject the contract. 99% of the employees in St. Paul city government are all union, including my lawyers. Everyone's a member of the union except for the commissioners I appointed. But I rejected the contract and said, I'm not going to bankrupt the city in 15 years. Sued, picketed, major fight with the public employee unions. I started 20 public charter schools. That was probably more charter schools than any place in the country. The first charter school in America. And again, I don't know if your listeners are familiar, viewers familiar, but charter schools, basically public schools that parents can form and put together. And so you can do classical education. You can require uniforms, a range of things. But it's education innovation. And so we had 20 of those, and I didn't raise taxes. And in 8 years as mayor, I cut 3/4 of the regulations. We did all the things that Republicans do or conservative Democrats do. But in the end, I didn't change a position, but I had the teachers union against me, the public employee union against me. I had the Democrat Party against me. And so in the end, I said, listen, I'm somebody who believes in teaching someone to fish, not just feeding them fish. I believe in less government, where it's needed, but more focus on the private side, on individual initiative. And so I switched parties as a result without switching a single position. And in the end was victorious. So, in fact, again, I didn't want to run for re-election in a place that wasn't true to my soul. And I can tell you that everyone thought I wouldn't win re-election in a city. I was the first Republican mayor in 30 years. I'll probably be the last Republican mayor in the city of St. Paul. There just aren't. I was part of the Republican Jewish Coalition. I was also, by the way, head of the JNF, Jewish National Fund, when I was in Minnesota. But as a Republican, it was me in a phone booth. That was the Republican Jewish Coalition. True story. I never met a Republican. When I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, I never met either a Republican or a Lutheran until I went to college. I thought they were both religious sects, that they were there weren't any in my neighborhood. And so I got to be a mayor, and I was tough on crime and cut taxes and grew jobs and cut regulation. And in the end, much more comfortable in the party that I am presently in and chairman of the Republican Jewish Coalition.
It sounds like what got you reelected, even after switching parties was people looked at the issues, people looked at your stances on things, and not if you're a D or an R. Do you think that's missing a little bit today in the political atmosphere, that everyone's so hung up?
And I got to tell you, by the way, it was easy to get elected as a mayor, but once you nationalize, when I ran for Senate and stuff, it gets tougher. By the way, what got me elected to the United States Senate was as mayor of St. Paul. I brought back a National Hockey League franchise to Minnesota. We had the Minnesota North Stars, and they left. I came in and I did a deal to bring in a hockey team, built an arena. It really transformed my city. I tell outsiders that you bring professional hockey back to Minnesota, as Ben knows, this is a big thing. People think you can walk on water. I remind them in Minnesota, we can walk on water 6 months of the year because it's frozen. So that wasn't a miracle, okay? It was just a very good thing that I did, and it got me elected. But the point being is that, even then there are partisan divisions. By the way, we've had partisan division in this country for a long time. Burr kills Hamilton kills, Burr kills Hamilton, Andrew Jackson, his wife was called a prostitute. His mother, I think he was called illegitimate, all sorts of things. The difference today is that when you say those things, they're heard instantaneously and around the world. They're tweeted, they're Facebook, they're Snapchat,
right?
And you can't take them back. Right. And we feed ourselves. We're polarized. We're polarized as a nation where we live, rural versus urban. We're polarized in terms of the media that we watch. Conservatives watching Fox and liberals watching MSNBC or CNN. Right? Yeah, and so there is the level of polarization is more intense and more chances for it to get out there and to kind of just hammer you. And so I think that has exacerbated this polarization that you guys are reflecting on, and that I think is unfortunate. I was always someone who was the beauty of the Senate. In the Senate, you needed to get to 60 to pass something. The House is just a majority, and it's the House. But whoever wins the House, that's the will of the public at that moment. They control. The Speaker controls everything. The Senate was there to cool things off. You need 60. You need to work with someone on the other side of the aisle. Which, by the way, you're hearing discussions now about if Democrats take control of the presidency, the House and Senate, they'll get rid of the filibuster. They'll use it to pack the Supreme Court. They'll use it to admit D.C. and Puerto Rico as states, adding 4 more liberals. They'll use it to give the right to vote to 15 million people who are not here legally. And if you do that, you will transform the institutions of America by a simple majority. The 51% will control the 49%. I think that's dangerous. So I think there's a benefit to having a body that requires you to listen to the other side, to talk to the other side. And if you have 53 senators, you got to get 7 folks, men and women from the other side on your side, or else you don't get something done. I think that was the beauty of our founders' vision. I would really lament if that were to be gone, if we would change that after this election.
What's the dynamic like day to day in the Senate? When the cameras aren't on and the press isn't around, is there honest dialogue? Is there discussion? Is there cooperation? Between the two sides of the aisle. How does that work when the camera?
Less so in the House. The House really is a kind of a partisan group. There are Democrats that don't talk to each other. Not everyone. There are some small groups of, the Get It Done coalition, whatever. But in the Senate, it's a lot better. Turn off the C-SPAN, maybe separate out leadership from the rank, from the members. There's a lot of discussion that goes on. When I was there were a group of us, myself, there was a Gordon Smith, represented Oregon, Mike DeWine, now governor of Ohio. These are Republican side. On Democrat side, you have folks like Mark Pryor from Arkansas. By the way, a lot of Southern Democrats, Mark Pryor from Arkansas, Blanche Lincoln from Arkansas, Mary Landrieu from Louisiana. But there were a number of folks that we kind of got together quietly. You have what they call hideaways in the Capitol. Every member has a little office, not just their own, but a little hideaway. And by the way, in that hideaway, that's your space. You want to light up a cigar, you want to have a drink, you can do it. But in those hideaways, we would get together and have conversation that really transcended the partisan divide. I think there's still a lot of that. But unfortunately, the base politics kind of dictate the more broader public discussion. And so just by way of example, when I was in the Senate, I worked with Ted Kennedy, Democrat, the other side of the aisle, we were as politically opposite as can be. And in the Senate, he was a lion. He just ripped the heck out of Republicans. But afterwards, he was very, very genteel, gracious. He and I chaired the Arts Caucus together, and he was very, very kind to me. But my point being is we, in fact, had a resolution of the immigration issue when I was in the U.S. in 2006. But at that point, the Democrat leader, Harry Reid, didn't want a resolution. They wanted the issue politically. And so in the end, we couldn't get a bill that probably would have passed. President Bush supported it. His cabinet was working on it. So you have on occasion, it happens on both sides of the aisle, where leadership says we want the issue, keep it alive. And even though there's a bipartisan coalition supporting a resolution, it doesn't come to fruition, which is terribly unfortunate.
Right. So you're the national board chair of the Republican Jewish Coalition. So in that role, who are you? What do you do? And what is the Republican Jewish Coalition today?
For those listeners
and I'm the national chairman. You know, we have a pretty esteemed board of very successful men and women. We support Republican candidates, presidential. We're in support of President Trump, members of the Senate, and to the House. We raise money for them. If they are, and it happens to be the Republicans. Here's one of the differences between Republicans and Democrats. If you're going to give money to the Republican Jewish Coalition, I can tell you that anybody that we're supporting is going to be pro-Israel. Okay? And if you're on the Democrat side, they're going to be supporting candidates who are not as pro-Israel as we think they should be. And the best example is the Iran deal, the JCPOA. A deal with folks in Israel understood was an existential threat to America, to Israel. It's also a threat to America because it really guaranteed Iran a path to nuclear weapon. I could tell the folks who are donating to the RJC, everyone that we give money to, that we support, would have opposed the Iran deal. Whereas on the Democrat side, many folks who, by the way, had proclaimed being good friends of Israel, supported the Iran deal.
Let me push back on that a little bit, Senator. I'm very familiar with the Iran deal. I have a long military and national security background. Won't get into it because our listeners are well aware. I was not a fan of the deal. I don't think it was horrible. I don't think it was awful. I wasn't a fan of it. I think it could have been done better. And I wrote that in numerous articles at the time. When we were talking last week to, she's not exactly your counterpart, but the head of the Democratic Jewish Council of America, they mentioned that strong support for Israel is one of their major foundations, and they won't support a Democrat who does not support Israel. They'll sit that one out. Do you feel that way about Republican candidates who don't support certain issues that are important to you as the Republican Jewish Coalition?
I just want to talk about the Iran deal. I talked to Israelis, talk to the Israeli government, talk to folks on all sides of the political spectrum in Israel, and they'll tell you that the Iran deal represented an existential threat to Israel's existence, that it guaranteed not a path for Iran to get a nuclear weapon, that it didn't have in place the ability to do investigations on Iranian military facilities. So talk to Israelis about an existential threat. And I'm going to be just real blunt here, real candid. You got Joe Biden right now and Barack Obama. Do you remember the last thing they did before they left office regarding Israel? UN Resolution 2334. To remind your listeners what that was, and the UN Security Council condemned Israel for, quote, the settlements in that UN Resolution 2334. So it's a condemnation of Israel. By the way, it declared that the Kotel, for the Western Wall, was under international law now occupied Palestinian territory. Okay, that deal was orchestrated by the Obama administration. Nikki Haley said that. At the time, the U.S., quote, abstained. But afterwards, it came out that we organized, we put that together as, I think, a slap in the face of Israel on the way out the door. And so for my Democrat friends, and again, Israel, here's my lament, by the way. Support for Israel should be a bipartisan issue. In the past, by the way, the Joe Bidens and the Steny Hoyers, they've been great supporters of Israel. But the reality is that today you have within the Democratic Party, the loudest voices are the Bernie Sanders. A lot of voices of the AOCs, Ocasio-Cortez, the Rashid Tlaibs out of Michigan, These are folks that all support, by the way, BDS. They support the BDS, which is a threat to the Jewish state. It says we're going to economically eliminate the Jewish state. To me, that's anti-Semitism. And so when my friends on the other side,
we agree on that point. We agree on that point. Right, we agree on that point. But to be fair, and we pushed back against Haley last week on this, and she made it very clear that, first of all, they don't support those candidates who support BDS, and secondly, there's really only 4 or 5, we'll call them anti-Israel candidates.
They call themselves the Squad.
The Squad. There's really only 4 or 5.
No, here's what you're missing. It's not 4 or 5. So when Chuck Schumer has a conference, right, about a major issue, who does he have standing right by his side? AOC, right? I think even on the right, that's who he has. It's not 4 or 5. That's a misnomer. If you look at the platform of the Democratic Party, Sanders said it was, Biden took our stuff. The Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is not a centrist, Democrat proposal, but it is the platform of the Democrat Party. Okay. And so, today's, Biden is saying, well, I support fracking. The Green New Deal doesn't support fracking. It eliminates fracking. Kamala Harris, support eliminating everyone on that stadium, including Biden at the time. And why did he take that path? Because the strength of the Democrat Party, by the way, is with the progressives. And by the way, not just 4, because if you look at the primaries that just took place, they picked up a number more seats. It would be a lie, okay, to say that the Squad represents 3 or 4 people in the Democratic Party. I mean, the reality is the movement in the Democratic Party is among the progressives, so that's, and the progressives are anti-Israel. The progressives support the BDS, so it's not a limited number. So I want to push back on your pushback.
Yeah, that's fine. let me push back on your pushback on my pushback on your pushback.
We're getting, there's like too many degrees now pushing back.
And to be fair to our listeners, the Democratic platform is pro-Israel. Supports Israel's right to exist, etc., anti-BDS. But we don't have to dwell on this issue. We had a look at the Republican Jewish Coalition's platform, and it's a lot more limited. And we thought this was an interesting point. It's a lot more limited than your counterparts' platform, where they take a stance on everything within the Democratic Party, and they support a lot of it, not all of it. And your platform as an organization was a lot more limited. So please tell us.
With the Republican Jewish Coalition, we're not the Republican Party, and so we engage people on a series of a limited series of issues. That's what we're looking for, right? So
please tell us.
We are the Republican Jewish Coalition, so we support tax cuts. We support efforts at school choice, which, by the way, is a Jewish issue, and the Democrat Party doesn't support that, doesn't support school choice, and certainly that's a major issue. We support the president's efforts to fight anti-Semitism, the executive order that he issued, but a lot of it is Israel. We're not AIPAC. AIPAC supports both folks on both sides of the aisle, and they've had challenges recently. They've had challenges. It's getting tougher for AIPAC, because there are loud voices in the Democrat Party that do support BDS. That's just simply a reality. And listen, an easy way, common sense. If you say, I support Israel, you can do that at any Republican gathering, and that's an applause line. You do not say that at gatherings of the Democrat base, and check the polling, okay? The polling of the Democratic base is not largely in favor of Israel today, okay? Different, check the numbers. As a Democrat, you cannot stand up and say, I support Israel and expect a round of applause. So that is I think, a fair, legitimate difference.
It is, and we agree with you. Does it, we always talk about how, and you said it yourself, Israel should be a bipartisan issue, right? Israel shouldn't be a political issue. And it has been, even though, like you point out, that's been shifting on the among those who vote Democrat. That's been shifting. The support for Israel has fallen. This is measured by all polls in recent years. Do you think that inadvertently the overwhelming support that Israel has among Republicans, which is a good thing, is causing a reaction, maybe an unwanted reaction on the other side of among Democratic voters who say, "Whoa, this is a Republican issue. We're going to get away from Israel."
Right. Maybe I don't care so much about Israel myself, but I went along with it because whatever. But now the Republicans are so strong in their support for Israel that clearly, if they support Israel, I have to go and maybe believe the sometimes progressive narratives of Israel as a white supremacist entity.
But I'll give you an acknowledgement. Okay, so here's the no, because I got to tell you, I think it stems from what we're teaching kids in college campuses, who growing up live with. BDS is very strong on college campuses. I mean, when my son is 34, when he was in college, he called me up. He says, "Dad, I just had a fight with my teacher because he was saying Israel is an apartheid state," and I challenged him. And I was the only one in the class that challenged him. And it may affect my grade, but I wasn't going to sit there and listen to that. I was at the University of St. Thomas.
What college did you go to?
University of St. Thomas, St. Paul, right? And Israel's apartheid state, by the way, and here are all the bad things that white men are doing in America, okay? But Israel apartheid state. You hear that is a constant refrain in college campuses. That's a reality. And so I think we're educating our kids to view Israel as an apartheid state. Which to me is just so unbelievable. It's you've got an Arab community that participates in Israel elections. Israel in terms of being a liberal democracy. I mean, if you look at what Israel's done with gay, lesbian, and diversity and everything, and the role of women. It's come on. You couldn't, and the U.S. couldn't have a better friend. So on the one hand, no, but I will admit. Let me just say this. That I think, the divide with Trump, President Trump being so close to Israel, probably anything that president does, you're going to get folks that kind of take a reaction to. And I recognize that. But by the way, in talking about support for Israel, you and I having this debate, ask Israelis. We're sitting here. I'm not sure when this is going to be played out, but I can tell you in the day that we're recording this, the reports in the U.S. paper of a major poll in Israel showing a 45-point edge for Donald Trump among Israelis. 63 to 18. And so Israelis are recognizing that, when Donald Trump, got rid of the JCPOA, when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem after, that was American law, by the way, since 1996, American law, okay, right? And never done.
Never know.
When he recognized the Golan. And by the way, I was at the White House a few weeks ago with the president and with the Israeli ambassador, and then his prime minister, Netanyahu was there. The ambassador was also there, but the prime minister was there. And for the agreement between Israel and the UAE, Israel and Bahrain, the president helped pull that together. And so in the end, you've got Israelis looking at this and saying, it's kind of obvious. We got one folks, who are on our side, and we got another guy who, behind the JCPOA, behind UN Resolution 2334, and it's got a party that unfortunately is becoming more and more anti-Israel. It breaks my heart. It shouldn't be that way, but that is what it is.
We definitely reflected on this a little bit last week as well, that it seems to be that, whenever there is a let's call it an unequivocal achievement of the administration in the Israel sphere, whether it's the Jerusalem embassy move or the UAE deal, or anything such as in
anything related to Israel.
Anything related to Israel that's been promulgated by the Trump administration, it is
immediately distanced, rejected.
By people that I'm sure that if it was something that the previous administration had done, would have been very happy. The act in and of itself would have been applauded and lauded. And look, I mean, I was having this discussion with my own mother. I updated her about the UAE deal and how us living in Israel, this is an amazing achievement. We feel like it's going to be a warm peace and not like the cold peace that we have with Egypt and Jordan, and it's going to make the region a much more safe place. And and by the way, it also happened to be something that was done or brokered by the Trump administration. And it seemed like, and maybe COVID has a role in this, that it's not, the front page of the newspaper, but it seemed like for them, it was like, oh, okay, well, I'm happy for you guys then. It was like, well, you should be happy for us. You should be happy for
the achievement.
For the achievement.
Yeah.
You should be able to find the nuance, to appreciate the nuance that even if you're against the Trump administration for many reasons that are, valid reasons for those people, like, can't you just see the achievement for what it is? I was upset that more people didn't celebrate the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, because as a Jew who lives in Israel, I mean, that's our capital. It's not something that's up for debate here anymore. It's 2020, and it just
goes to your point, which I was
bothers
acknowledging, that in fact, if Trump is for it, then you're going to find some people against. That it does exacerbate, unfortunately, divide. I wish it weren't so, but that is what it is.
Do you?
And I'll point out here that, and I say this in a lot of my lectures to delegations and visiting politicians, when Israelis look at who the American president is and how they are to Israel, they're looking at a very narrow lens. I'm just putting this in context to our listeners. They're looking at a very narrow lens of what has this president done for Israel in the Middle East. They're not looking at any kind of issue. They're not looking at issues of racism or white supremacism or divisiveness or crude behavior or things we can get into in a minute here, or his tax policy or his environmental policy. They're looking literally, what does he do about Israel? That's all the average Israeli sees in the news. That's all they care about. So just to explain why an overwhelming number of Israelis, and also Israelis, tend to be more right-wing than
we'll get into
left-wing.
I'm sure the other discussion about tweets and things about personal behavior.
Yeah.
But in the end, don't you think you should judge people by what they do? Okay. I think that's fair, that debate. You judge people by actually what they accomplish. Steve Covey, he's an author, an inspirational writer. He once made the comment about, I can remember how he said that we judge others by their deeds, we judge ourselves by our intentions, okay? And that we're actually putting the tougher standard on the deeds, because intentions are, I'm really want to help you here. I tell my friends, in Minnesota, we all know the Scandinavian who loved his wife so much he almost told her, okay? And I say my Democratic friends care so much they almost do something. They really care about the poor, but welfare didn't do what it needed to do, and so it needed welfare reform. They always care so much, and so in the end, intentions are pretty nice. Where we're always judging, I really intended to do that, but doing the deed is a little tougher. And so I always come back and judge the president on his deeds. By the way, one other aspect of the UAE, Bahrain, Israel deal that hasn't been mentioned, that I think for your listeners, your viewers, is really important, was the Saudi decision to allow flights over Saudi airspace. I know that because that opens up India. It opens up that whole Far East. Otherwise, it was like adding 4 hours, wherever it was, to a flight, and you made commerce and tourism and everything. It was gone. It wasn't there. But now, with that ability to fly over the kingdom, that really open. That's a huge economic benefit to Israel. And one of the things that hardly has been noticed in the deal that the president engineered with our Gulf allies.
It's a huge move, and it's bigger than that, because it's almost overt. It's not even tacit. It's an almost overt statement by Saudi Arabia, who's become the leader of the Arab world today. I'll call it the moderate Arab world, and also U.S. ally, of where they're going on this issue, that they're now going to let Israel fly over their airspace. They're moving towards normalization. It's going to take them longer, but they're moving in that direction. What was it like? You were there. You were on the lawn,
yes.
correct?
Yeah.
During the signing? We were, Ben just talked about this, that in the U.S. and especially among, those who vote Democratic, including Jews who love Israel and have been to Israel and have family in Israel, it was overlooked. It was overlooked because of the connection to Trump.
Not even a nod. This is a major historic opportunity. Joe Lieberman was there. There were a couple of Democrats who were there.
I can tell you, we all watched it here, like the moon landing.
Wow.
We all watched it here. I literally had tears in my eyes from joy. I'm part of a group that's bringing together Emiratis and Israelis. We're about 100 of us on a WhatsApp group, and we're talking day and night to each other. And the Emiratis on their side and all the Israelis on our side were very emotional on this group. And here in Israel, just across the board, this was like watching the moon landing. This was that big for us.
Saying to you, I'm moved by it. I was there on the lawn. And again, I recognize you're right, that this is really historic. This is very, very powerful. By the way, just getting back to our conversation, so what moved the Israelis and the Saudis and the Emiratis and our Gulf nations to kind of come together? It was Obama negotiating a Iran deal, not telling Israel, by the way, he was having a negotiation, telling the Saudis publicly in an Atlantic magazine article that they need to learn to share the neighborhood with the Iranians. Okay, right. That's like telling somebody you got to share the neighborhood with the pedophile who's moved in a couple down 3 houses away. But that was Obama's statement. You need to share the neighborhood, that they recognize Iran's kind of dominance in the region, rather than them being a pariah, rather than them being the largest state sponsor of terror. They just about own Baghdad. They just about own Sana'a in Yemen. They're supporting Hezbollah. They're supporting Hamas. They're got power in Damascus. I mean, it's stunning what the Iranians have done. And Obama, by doing that, actually, I think forced the Israelis and our Gulf neighbors, Gulf allies, to figure out a way to start working together, because the United States wasn't there. Now, with Trump, we are there, and the results of what you saw on that lawn. But for a while, the sense was, listen, maybe they're not going to be there for us. And if not, we got to take care of ourselves. So let's kind of get rid of some of the things that have blocked this. And now let's have a conversation. And I have no doubt that conversation took place.
I totally agree with you, and I published as much when the deal was first announced. I totally agree with that analysis. It was huge, and I think the Obama administration refusing to really actively take on Iran in Syria, the deal. I remember very clearly that Atlantic article. That was a signal to the Saudis, to the Emiratis, to us, to say, you know what, maybe the U.S. won't be by our side forever. And I got to say, though, the U.S. under Trump, the Trump administration, rhetorically has been, very aggressive against Iran, taken clear positions, taken a very clear pro-Israel, pro-Saudi, pro-Gulf line. But as far as American willingness to put boots on the ground or to put a strong presence in the region, we're feeling the same. You talked about results and not intentions. The intentions are clearly different, but we're not seeing. There seems to be just a huge American reticence to get back into the Middle East, because it just hasn't gone well every time the U.S. is in the Middle East.
The president's tactics. The president doesn't want to put American troops on the ground. Okay, fight your own wars. That's what he's saying. So, Saudis, sure. you put some resources into Syria. Okay, and so the approach he has taken, which is extremely aggressive, has been on the sanctions. He can and the fact is that they have disrupted the Iranian economy. Iran is not in good shape now. They destroyed any opposition, during the Green Movement. If you go back again, Obama time, when that young girl, Nadia, I think her name was shot on the streets of Tehran, okay, and Obama had nothing to say, said nothing. And I can tell you, I was in the Senate at that time. Any opposition to the mullahs was wiped out. There was no Wek Valenza. There was no mobilizing person to the opposition. Today, the situation in Iran is pretty tough and economic, and so you got to give the president credit for the intense, use of sanctions, but he's not going to put troops in. That's not his nature. He wants them out. He ran on that. I disagree with some of his policy regarding American presidents. I'm in the Lindsey Graham camp. Okay, I think we got it. We've been in Germany for 40, 50, 70 years now. Whatever it is, we can be in Baghdad, to ensure that ISIS doesn't come back. Another Obama fault is that I was there and I saw the impact of the surge in 2008. And then Obama comes in and steps back, and ISIS, all of a sudden, they got a caliphate, bigger than England or whatever. And so Trump takes that out. Another difference, takes out Soleimani, criticized, goes to your point, because Trump did it, criticized. If Obama would have done it, I think people would have applauded it. Takes out Soleimani, right? The chief murderer among the Iranians, who's killed thousands and injured. right? Not a nice guy. So
not a nice guy.
Baghdadi hardly got a nod on that. Those are, and in the end, destroyed the caliphate for ISIS. So, long answer to your question, he's not about putting troops on the ground. That's not his style. That's not what he wants to do. But I don't think you can say that's a reflection of being out of the Middle East. I think he's, in fact, in the Middle East. Well, that's what is Jared and Jason Greenblatt before him and now Avi doing, in terms of trying to keep pushing a deal, pushing a resolution, and getting the Palestinians, God, Brett, it was think about your kids, okay? Think about your kids, about a better future for your kids, trying to get them back to the table. So I challenge the stepping back from the region. I concur that he doesn't want it in terms of troops on the ground. He's not going to go that route.
Right.
So I want to go take a step back into American domestic issues and domestic politics for a second. I know you, and I know that you're a very, very proud Jew, and that goes back all the way to your upbringing. And here you are, you're the board chair of the national board chair of the Republican Jewish Coalition. I'll ask a question that you might reject the premise of the question, but Trump has been accused, and I think both of us here sitting here definitely feel this way. Dog whistling towards white supremacist groups or anti-Semitic things that have been said. Just a couple of things. Calling Israel your country to a group of Jews, or saying to if you vote Democrat, you're not loyal to Israel or to your country, or things like that.
Good people on both sides.
That
Proud Boys, stand back, sit down.
Yeah, stand back and stand by, or something like that. Stuff like that. That's just like, you look at that from abroad, especially. Dan and I both, we'll look at that and be like, wait a second, this is bizarre. Because on the one hand, you have these very, very clear, pro-Israel policies that are taking place, and on the other hand, you're going, what's going on with the Jews in America? Like, what's going on towards the Jews in America? Why does this have to be this way? So, and
a lot of people will claim, including our guest last week, that the rise of Trump, maybe not necessarily Trump himself, but the rise of Trump, that spirit that brought him into power, and maybe even him as a figure in some of his tweets and some of his kind of comments that he'll make at conventions, are a signal that have boosted the confidence of white supremacist groups, ultra kind of far-right groups, where better than we do, Jews don't feel comfortable and shouldn't feel comfortable with those things. So how do you sit in the same proverbial room as those kind of comments, as some of his supporters from kind of the alt-right and the far-right base? How does that work?
Personal level. Actually, a little anecdote here. So Jason Greenblatt, who was Trump's lawyer, Orthodox Jew, doesn't work on Shabbat, right? Negotiated the peace deals, represented the president for, I don't know, a couple of decades, whatever. On person knows him real well. And when he came before our RJC board, half of our board were not pro-Trump. Okay, we in the end we supported him as a nominee, but some of us were very much against Trump, and including myself. Oh yeah, absolutely, and
including yourself,
strongly against Trump. In the end, by the way, just kind of fast forward, and I look at the things he's done, and we've articulated so many of them, and said, okay, this president has earned my support by what he's done, the embassy, the Golan, on and on. We had a long discussion today about that. Okay, so but Greenblatt comes in and says, I know this guy, and he's the real deal, and there's not a hint of anti-Semitism in his body. He appoints by the way, and I don't even want to just kind of mention, he's got a Jewish daughter and a Jewish grandkids and a Jewish son who's pretty powerful in the administration. And so on that personal level, you got that. Greenblatt's appearance for our board, I got to tell you, if we were split, it was at that point 95% pro-Trump at that point, saying, listen, this guy who's so solid, such a mensch, he's a Hamish, this guy is so strong that if he's telling us this, we should think about this a bit more, which we did. So he just kind of put the personal out there. And then you look at the things that he's done on anti-Semitism. You look at his appointing an envoy. You look at him issue an executive order, which hadn't been done before, which to combat anti-Semitism on American campuses. You look at I took originally, thought the president should have been tougher on Charlottesville, but I have to say that his comment though about folks on both sides, that quote false news, he said he condemned right before that, white supremacy, condemned it. but then said, in terms of the folks out there protesting, and they were about monuments, there are folks on both sides, on both sides. Not everyone was a white, but he condemned the supremacists. He's condemned the KKK. And then when you talk, those people who try to say, well, there's a rise of anti-Semitism in the U.S. Have any of you guys been to France lately? Huh? Have you been to Europe? You want to blame that on Donald Trump? I remember the last time I was in Tel Aviv. Yep. Actually, it was a year ago, not the last time, but one of the times I was in Tel Aviv. I was at one of the hotels there, and everyone in the pool was speaking French. And I asked why. I speak a little bit of French, because he said you can't be a Jew and live in France today. Okay, that's not so. Those folks are claiming a rise of anti-Semitism because of the president. Listen, his choice of words are not always the best. Okay, his actions again have been very, very strong. He has condemned anti-Semitism as strong as can be. He has condemned white supremacy. He has condemned the KKK. And by contrast, and I think what gets him irritated, it's got to be with that Proud Boy thing. He's frustrated that no one's asking Joe Biden, he said Antifa is a concept. No, it's not a concept. It's a terrorist organization that is impacting American cities. Head of the FBI said that. And so the Democrats have a convention for 4 days. They don't mention once at their convention what's going on in the streets of Minneapolis, in Seattle, in Portland, the rising murder rate in New York, Chicago. They don't even mention it. And so he feels like, hey, I'm getting hammered on all this stuff. And so I disagree with the premise that he hasn't been there. And I disagree with the premise that somehow you're going to relate the rise of anti-Semitism to Donald Trump. And this is a global phenomenon. It's what we're dealing here. But as I say that, let me tell you, and it's, by the way, why am I concerned about the left populism? Because the clearest, loudest voice of anti-Semitism in the U.S. are not white supremacists. Okay, it is the left. They are more dominant in the political. You hear very little about white supremacy. It comes up, but it is the left. It is Antifa, by the way. It is the Black Lives, BLM, and the speakers. The Linda Sassoras who speak at these marches. Linda Sassoras being a noted anti-Semite, and I think the president gets frustrated by there being no recognition, nothing, and he's always being hammered. Again, anti-Semitism is a disease. It's a virus that has plagued us for so long, but it's not just Donald Trump in America, and the Israelis know that. They should know that, because they look at their neighbors who are coming in and they're fleeing from Europe because of the rise of anti-Semitism there.
I'll agree with you on the point that the left-wing anti-Zionism, for sure, borderline anti-Semitism, and at times outright anti-Semitism on the far left is louder. I think it's more prevalent. And yet we've never seen a far left, white supremacist or whatever their equivalent of is shoot up a synagogue or try to attack a synagogue. And I think that's where the concern is coming from. And of course, if you're a Jew in America, and here we look at it too, you got to be concerned about anti-Semitism from all directions.
There's no argument.
And we pushed back on our guest last week.
You're not hearing the more prevalent, the more impactful, the things that are impacting our kids every day. You have a couple of crazies that do something, but you have a little movement that in every college campus today is it's a disease that's infecting the American body politic. And I don't think our friends on the left are doing enough to root it out. But I'm not disagreeing that on the right we have to be, so the president disavows David Duke. Listen, we even, the RJC, we didn't support a Steve King, okay? In Iowa, because we didn't like some of the things he was saying. On the other hand, the Dems are all supporting AOC, and they're supporting Tlaib, and they're supporting these new members who just got elected.
The Dems are, but to be fair, sir. To be fair, the Democratic Jewish organization is not supporting anyone who supports BDS, and they made that very clear last week. Do you guys ever, you in your position, your organization, senior, Greenblatts and senior Republican Jewish figures, does anyone ever come to Trump and say that comment that you said, about you can't buy the Jews because they don't need your money? Or does anyone ever go to him, kind of when the microphones are off and say, sure, that wasn't cool, man. You can't talk.
That's again, everyone cheers about this. I go back to my deed about Steve, about deeds, about what you've done. Okay. So he says he has a beautiful, on the high holy days, has a beautiful, remarks to the Jews, a couple hundred who assembled on the call, talks about his love of his Jewish faith, talks about Israel, and at the end makes this comment about your country. Now, what the comment should have been was the country that you care about, okay, that is really important to so many. I don't, I mean, listen, Joe Biden can't remember if he's running for Senate or the president, and no one says, and no one says that, right? He just made a comment today when he was running yesterday, he was running for the Senate. Couldn't remember Mitt Romney's name. So the president makes a comment about, quote, your country. I have no doubt that what he intended, and it was at the very end, it was the last thing he said. But if he would have said the country that you care about, that is so important to you, is important to me, that's what was meant there. And so I just think he gets excoriated, taken apart word for word. And by the way, I don't see that on the other side. I really don't see that kind of dissecting of what someone is saying. So the president gets held, but I think that was an innocuous comment.
Yeah, I'll say you served in the Senate at a time, and this is when I was growing up, when politics were a little bit more. I won't be ignorant enough to say that everything was friendly and hunky dory. No. Absolutely not. But I think the civil discourse around politics was a lot different.
Social media,
because of social media and all the things that we said. Do you ever look at like what's going on today, and be like, okay, we're 2020, we've got COVID, we've got all these issues, and like, the people that are in this election are Donald Trump and Joe Biden with, whatever we can say, cognitive issues that he's having. Like, is this the best that we get 330 million Americans? Like, this is what we're dealing with now.
Like politics is a business of choices. It's a binary business. Okay. And we've got a president who has been the best friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. Okay. And again, Israelis recognize that. As per the poll that we just saw, they recognize he's been the best friend that Israel has ever had. I don't agree with everything that Donald Trump says. I don't agree with everything he does. But I am a passionate supporter of his reelection because the people that will put on the Supreme Court, including the nomination that's going on right now of Amy Coney Barrett, because of what he's done with the American economy. Prior to COVID, we had the lowest unemployment rate of African Americans, the lowest unemployment rate of Hispanics. We had the best economic growth, I think, on the planet. And so I look at what he's done with regulation. I look at what he's done with the things that impact my life. When I wake up every day and I'm around the breakfast table with my family, I'm thinking about, one, do I have a job? I'm thinking about, is my wife and family going to be safe when I'm at work? Is my kid going to be able to go to school? Those are the things. And I think on those this president has been exemplary. And so in the end, but I think you raise another question. So, I think the real question is, does it have to be this brutal? Does it have to be this so divisive? Is the partisan divide, does it have to be so great? I wish it weren't, and I don't have an answer. And you guys have talked about it. So I think social media is a big part of it. The immediacy of the attacks. It's hard to put it back, the genie back in the bottle. And so I lament the environment in America. I lament the vitriol. I wish the president could kind of find a way to kind of step away from that, not take it so personally. I wish the Democrats, would be more outspoken against the folks that are dominating now, the far left that's dominating the conversation in their party. But it is what it is. And so you got binary choices. And in the end, are you going to go with somebody who is going to do the right things to grow jobs? Or are you going to take we had under Biden and Obama the slowest recovery, perhaps in history. And I just don't think policies of, quote, taxing the rich, they call it. It's not just the rich. You're going to end up, small business people I don't want to get too much detail, but a small business person files taxes as an individual. That's that's kind of the structure, an LLC. That's how they file. So they're now rich. Farmers who have all this money and land, they're seen as millionaires, but don't have $1 million in their pocket. They got 1,000 acres or something. It's worth a lot of money in Iowa. A couple thousand acres worth a lot of money in Iowa. And so I just think in terms of the choices that in the end you got to decide where you're at. I would hope that we could find a time and find a way for America to be more uniting, find a way in the Senate for folks. As I said, you asked that question earlier about what happens when the cameras go up. There's a lot of discussion, among the members of the Senate, and they're good people on both sides of the aisle. I mean, I learned that I didn't know, and I try to teach my kids this. You don't know everything. Somebody else may have a better idea. It's worth listening to them. That would be a good thing. And I think if we in the political side did more of that, we'd be better served. But it is what it is, and you got to play with the cards that are being dealt you.
Let me ask you what might be the last question, depending on your time. I know you have an appointment after this, and maybe you don't have an answer, but it's something that we kind of discuss. When we talk about Jews in America and which party they're voting for. So we know traditionally, overwhelmingly, and like you said, growing up, most Jews always voted Democrat. And I think probably in the 80s into the 90s, it started switching a little bit. Today, we know it'll be between 20 to 30% of American Jews will vote Republican, and it kind of depends on the candidate. More voted for Obama, et cetera. Our guest last week, it was very clear, representing the Jewish Democratic Organization, that they took a stance on virtually every issue and said these issues are not just Democratic issues, they're Jewish issues, right? So if she's talking about the environment, if she's talking about immigration, if she's talking about, fighting racism, inclusion, all these things, LGBT rights, etc. Do you have a sense that those Jews who vote Republican, is that coming from a sense that no, Republican values are Jewish values, or is it more limited? Do you have a sense in what you're doing that conservative values, small government, all these things, is there kind of a correlation with your understanding of Jewish values?
The fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans is this. Let me step back. When I ran for Senate against Paul Wellstone, I interviewed with this, and Ben knows, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, a very liberal paper. And at the end of the interview, their editor said, you sound a lot like Senator Wellstone. And I said, well, because I was talking about we want to ensure that every kid has the opportunity to be the best they can be. We differ in how we get there. We differ in our approach. And so, our approach is that we kind of build up individual opportunity, that we give kids the opportunity to go to the best, any school that they want. Democrats would say no. Teachers union controls the process there, and so they're against charter schools. They're against school choice. Private education among American Jews is a pretty big issue. I think that's a Jewish value. But they're on one side. We have a different vision of how you get to that place where every kid has the opportunity to be the best they can be. One believes in more government. If you believe in more government, you're going to have more taxes, you're going to have more regulation, you'll have single-payer health care. If you believe in less government, but government where it creates an opportunity, again, teach people to fish, then you're not going to have single-pay, you're not going to have the government control your health care, you're not going to have massive regulation, a Green New Deal, which in the end is going to impact jobs in Pennsylvania on things like fracking, will impact Minnesota farmers who are, growing cows that have flatulence that adds to CO2 in the air. I think what we do is we simply disagree on how we get there. But yeah, I think that for Jews, again, I go back to the things that are important to me. There is a difference, I must admit. I'm going to say it up front on some of the social issues. Listen, for a lot of our brethren, and Norman Podora said this right, they think when Moses came down from that mountain, as they said, he had those two tablets, right? And one was written abortion, the other said gay rights, and that's it. Okay? And for us, it was the 10 Commandments. But and by the way, gay rights isn't even an issue. Law is settled on that in the U.S. I don't think anyone is having an argument over that. Still arguments over life issue. But aside from the social issues, if you kind of look at the things that are important to you as a person, as a Jew, and this is, to say that we are entrepreneurial is not an insult, okay? Because we have to be entrepreneurial, because we got kicked out of every country, because we had to use our brains to survive, and our smarts, because we couldn't own businesses, we couldn't settle, we were in, ghettos somewhere. And so, yeah, I think Jews are pretty entrepreneurial, and I think they value education. And so those are, the things that are important to me as a Jew are important to me as an American. And then, but the other added plus is Israel. And there is a dividing line there. As much as you say that the Democrats aren't supporting folks who support BDS, the reality is that but their party, more and more the dominant force, the movement in the party is this progressive socialist movement. And by the way, I got to tell you, I grew up, populism on either side, left or right, makes me very nervous. Okay. I'm not a populist, okay? Because when those folks had those pitchforks, they were coming after my relatives. They were coming after my ancestors, and so I think that's the challenge. So listen, if the Democrats could do a better job of somehow getting back to where they were, and not ceding the territory on environment, on social, on politics, on a whole range of things to the squad and their progeny, I think we'd all be better. So I think Israel would be better served, but that's not the reality. And so, long answer to a short question. I think the value is consistent with Jewish values, but I think historically, when Barry Goldwater, on principle, his principle didn't support, what the Freedom Voting Rights Act, right? That moved a lot of, American Jews, and Franklin Roosevelt moved a lot of Jews. As I said, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I never met a Republican. It was almost part of our DNA. But I do think it's switching, it's growing, and we're not going to get a majority. But if you go from 20% to 23%, 28%, 30%, I think that's kind of the direction we're moving in. And I'll end on this note that President Donald Trump has been the best friend that Israel's ever had in the White House. I think that's reflected on the things he's done. And for Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship, and I think Israel, as we've said a number of times in this, this conversation, Israelis recognize it. You saw it in that recent poll. I see it every time I'm sitting in a cab in Israel, I'm in the streets of Israel. They recognize that this president has been very good for the Israel-U.S. relationship and for Israel's security.
I'll comment on that. Not a question, because I assume you're not a fortune teller. Something that has crossed my mind, and I've told Ben here in private conversations numerous times. I have Biden. I think Biden is a friend of Israel. We can disagree about, the way he gets there. Like you said, I think we should agree about the major goals, and we can disagree about the way you get there. And I fear the day that the Democrats will nominate someone who is not pro-Israel and who is possibly anti-Israel. And then I wonder what will happen in the American Jewish community, which American Jews, and this is going to be provocative, and I know it, which American Jews are going to prefer progressive democratic values that has an anti-Israel foreign policy focus, and which American Jews who currently vote Democrat will stick with Israel, foregoing their progressive values. And right now, I'm thankful they don't have to make that choice. And I fear the day that they might have to make that choice.
That a lot of the next generation doesn't have that tie to Israel. I mean, I'm a baby boomer. I grew up in the days, Israel's, as a kid, Exodus, Israel's independence, the 67 war, just all these things are part of my upbringing. And this, the folks, my kids and their kids, sure, I don't think have that same reflection. And I think we got to do a better job. It's why birthright and other things like that I fully support. Let folks go. One of the biggest ways to people support Israel is to go to Israel and talk to Israel. Right.
Oh, so I'll close on this note. As a tourism professional, the best way that we can get people to go back to Israel is for this COVID stuff and this garbage period of our lives to be behind us. And when that happens, let the floodgates open, and the more people that can come here to discover the wonderful country that is Israel and the beauty of the Jewish people.
They're wonderful and very complex.
Very complex, but wonderful, the better. And when that happens, Senator Coleman, I have no doubt that you will be amongst the first people to get on that plane and make the trip over. So we'll definitely, when that happens, invite you for a drink. And maybe next time we're in Minnesota together, I'll give you a call. We can get together.
You all the very best. Thanks so much.
We thank you so much for your time and your openness and your candidness with us. Really great. Thank you.
No,
we can say Shana Tova. Much health. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Jewanced is a joint creation of Benny Shoulder and Dan Pfefferman. Make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you get your podcasts.
For more information and show notes about this and previous episodes, visit us at Jewanced.com and feel free to hit us with your comments and suggestions. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you back for the next episode of Jewanced.